The smarter you are in the world now, the easier it is to manipulate you.
What a paradox.
And what I mean by smart is I mean intellectually smart. So one of the things that Steiner really shared with us is the way to educate is through intelligence. That intelligence always carries with it a sense of love and responsibility and freedom. Whereas the intellect is a little bit like you used the word angst earlier, or anxious. That the etymology of those words literally mean to narrow. You narrow your perception, you narrow your breathing, which Steiner says is actually just enlivened thinking, and that thinking itself is breathing.
Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. My name is Mimi, and I'm sitting next to my favorite human on earth, my love, my lover, my king, Chase.
What is going on, everybody? Man, we're so excited for today's conversation. I got introduced to our guest today here about a month or so ago, and just absolutely have my mind blown in the abundance archetype community that I'm a part of. So I'm really honored to get to introduce our guest today, Edmund Knighton. Welcome to the Medicine Podcast.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you, Mimi. It's great to be here.
We are so excited. As I told you before we pushed record, I am so excited because I've only heard little bits and pieces. I was in the room when the call was going with Chase's Abundance Archetype group, and then we had great conversation afterwards. You know, after the call, Chase he's like, oh my God, I can't wait to talk to this guy. And so it actually sparked a lot of wonderful dialogue and discussion between us. And I'm so excited to be able to offer that to our listeners.
In this little cup, I have my favorite way to enjoy mushy love, which is in combination with cold milk. We drink raw cow's milk, and I put it about 8 ounces of milk in with about a scoop and a half of mushy love. That combination, like the cold version of mushy love, tastes like liquid graham crackers. Like, I shit you not. If you don't know yet what mushy love is, it's our mushroom elixir with 500 milligrams of chaga, which is amazing for gut support. They call it the king of mushrooms. And then 500 milligrams as well of tremella mushroom, which is the beauty mushroom. And she is most known for holding 500 times her weight in water. The more hydrated we are, the more plump and dewy and fresh and young our skin looks.
Plump and dewy.
For Mushy Love, go to getmushylove.com and you can use the code MEDICINE for a nice little discount that we only give to our Medicine Podcast listeners.
The first question that we ask every guest on the Medicine is, what do you love in your life? What aspect of your life do you love so much that you wish you could gift it to everyone?
My wife popped into my head right away. 34 years of just total incredible bliss, you know, and conflict being a part of that bliss, just all bliss. My beautiful son, I got a beautiful boy with autism and Down syndrome, and he's the light of my life. The gratitude for the men's groups that I'm in, the men's councils, that work, being able to work with individuals with consulting work and deep listening and counsel work. Yeah. And then the other thing, it might be just kind of weird to say, but I'll say it anyways, is this morning in particular, nothing. Nothing. I was just thinking, like, what am I full of right now? And I thought it's just being nobody and being nothing and being nowhere. And I'm super grateful for the spaciousness of that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. That's something that you can meditate on for probably hours and time just disappears.
We, especially when we live in such short-sightedness, you know, so much of our time is spent looking at a screen, we forget how much space we actually have. And even in, you know, we live in a condo on an island outside of San Diego, and, you know, we essentially have like 40 roommates because we live in this complex with a bunch of other condo owners. But even that, when you actually think about the amount of space that you do have in your life, and a very anxious feeling is almost as if there's this weight upon your chest. But in reality, we do have so much space to acknowledge. And even sometimes that level of mindfulness to make aware how much room you actually have to breathe and expand your breath is very anchoring to the present moment, and very much a tool for enlightening oneself on the lack of stress and anxiety that you can actually have in one moment.
Yeah. And I'm looking at your two physical bodies there, but then I also realize from a quantum perspective, you guys are as big as that island, right?
Right.
And bigger and bigger. Right. So even though I'm in this tiny little room, it doesn't stop with the room. That is for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's actually a meditative practice that I've heard from people like John Wineland, who does a lot of men's work, in the masculine space, like people cultivating a healthy, nourished masculine energy, is to focus on, the space within your body, the space between cells, the space, in your lungs. And it really anchors you into that like masculine strength, I think. Anyways, I just thought of him, and I've heard and seen that sort of as a meditative practice. And I think one of the benefits being when we feel constricted, an anxious feeling is a constricted, almost like prison-like feeling, like you're just imprisonated by your anxiety, and focusing on the space, even the space between words as someone is speaking, is sort of a meditative practice. Anyways, I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but
no, actually, you're speaking my incredible love language, because I wrote my doctoral dissertation on exactly what you just talked about.
Wow.
The qualitative perception of the space between.
Mm-hmm.
And not space as a metrical phenomenon, as quantitative, but what's the quality of space, as you said, between cells or between people or between me and my higher self? And is there a way to create exercises to have experiences of that while we're in body? So I spent 3 years just writing, researching, and thinking about that connection with the space between all things.
I love that. I think
it's like the core of who I am. So you just nailed it. I think we're done. Thank you guys so much.
We're good.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, is like that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. Obviously, it's a whole dissertation. But I'm sure, and I won't speak for you, but like as you look out into the world and have this unique perspective from the Rudolph Steiner and the Waldorf school perspective, when you're looking out at the world and the individuals that are making it up, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of mental health issues, there's a lot of just issues all around, global crises. Like from your perspective, focusing on the space between and everything that you just spoke of, what are you seeing in our world with the individuals that are making it up? Like, I don't really know how to frame that question, but I'm just curious what you see when because I know what I see, but it's probably completely different from your lens.
Yeah, I would say my lens, that is such a deep question, Mimi. The first thing I see, which is helpful for me, so I don't lose my love for humanity, is that I see myself. And when I say myself, I don't mean like Edmund. I mean the entity that is me, that knows that I've been here for eons and will, God willing, continue to be here for eons. And so I don't have that sense of separation or otherness from all of what's going on in the world. So all of the mental illness and all of the trauma, and individuals who are working really hard to awaken people. And those individuals stand on two different sides. There is one side that chooses to work in a space of separatism and othering and manipulation and enslavement and a kind of a darkness that they welcome themselves and they welcome other people to be underneath them in that. And at the same time, folks have an opportunity when they get those invitations to move in that direction or not. It is their own free will. We don't get enslaved by other people. No one else determines our response to a situation. No one else is the master of my feelings or my thoughts or my actions. I'm completely free. And that way I don't get to be a victim. And I have to take responsibility for everything that I say and do and feel. And I know that those things that I do and move in the world they're forming my future being. the way that I speak now and feel now, the thoughts that I have are actually forming what I'm going to look like the next time I come around. And so when I think about those people, I see them as myself. I see their striving, and I see that all serve the Creator and all serve creation in their own way. One of the thoughts I came up with this morning was, it was kind of startling on one hand, but excuse me, God is evil. God is evil.
That's a bold and potentially confusing statement for a lot of people.
It is. And what I mean by that is that if we're going to live in a space of duality, we're going to call something good. We don't have anything to compare it to unless there's something evil. And in my experience, the Creator is everything. And so God is evil. And it's really that simple. And those individuals who are working the path of what I would call evil or elitism are working super hard for God. And a lot of them don't even know it. But you see what those folks are doing in the world, and they're a beautiful reminder to the path that I'm on, which is to love and serve other people and to radiate my love to them. And every time I see an individual do something that can impoverish someone else's life, it redoubles my love. And I recognize that my love for them and my appreciation for them also has to be present. Otherwise, I'm just digging a hole for myself. I'm not doing anything to them by hating them. All I'm doing is hating me. All I'm doing is just getting small and ugly and mean and limiting myself as a creator, as somebody who can think and move freely in the world and create things. That's what I want to be. I want to co-create. I want to be that drop in the ocean. So that's my experience of when I look out into the world. Otherwise, I think I would be completely demoralized. I would be sarcastic and cynical. I would have righteous anger and feel really good about that. I would just go down, like you said, I would go down a rabbit hole, but it would be one of pretending that those beings that are all created in unity are separate from myself, and that we're not all actually working toward the same thing. And at some point in their development, certainly, they recognize that we've all been working for the same thing. And in a moment, they shift polarity, and they become aware of the fact that they've been working on behalf of all of us the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Actually a lot harder than the rest of us have been, because that path of separateness is really tough to hold. You got to be 95% on point there. You've got to be coherent in a light way, in a laser focused way. Whereas you and I working together, all we got to do is sort of creep above 50%, and we're in the home zone.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective, and one that I aspire to. I can't say that I always feel that way. It's something that I value, and will continue to remind myself that it's not participating in the othering. I can say it, but it's another thing to actually live it and embody it.
Yeah, I really feel like as we sit in this space and we talk about this, I feel the truth in the articulation of what it actually means to understand that we are in this together, and that polarity is held up by those who may frustrate us. I go out into the world and I'm like conscious of that reality, but am incompetent in the way that I embody it and get frustrated and still think that there's some sort of finite game that I'm trying to outdo with good the bad that's out there, and that is this tricky slippery slope down into this win or lose game that we think we're a part of so often, and this really is the infinite game. And I love all of it. I know so much of this is rooted in the Law of One, which was absolutely a life-changing read for both of us as we were along in our journey. But before we get too much further, Edmund, would love to get a little background on you. Obviously everybody's aware at this point you're brilliant, and I've had the chance to hear a little bit about Rudolph Steiner from you, as well as the Waldorf education and your involvement over the years with Waldorf. And so I'd love to even before we get into a little bit of who Rudolph Steiner was, Waldorf education, and some of the men's work that you do, maybe share with us a little bit about your background. How did you get into this work? What have you been up to in the world, and what impact have you been a part of? And a little bit of the backstory as far as like how you got into that space.
You want me to start from here and go backwards, or start from the back and go forwards?
Yeah,
Whatever works for you.
Maybe non-linear, maybe just a whole lot of whatever comes up. Let me just see what's here. Well, I mean, you mentioned the law of one, and you mentioned Steiner, and I would say that, like probably, 90% of America, certainly used to be. I came out of a Christian background, and it was okay. Like I like the minister; he's a nice guy. I like the candlelight service at Christmas. Yeah, I like making that love banner at Sunday school for my mom. But other than that, like it didn't quite get there. But I didn't know it didn't get there because I didn't know what there was. I didn't know there was a there. And I had an interesting upbringing. My parents were both married 4 times each before I left the house. So I never thought I wanted to get married or have kids, just because I saw all the ways that you struggled and it didn't work. And I thought, well, maybe this institution called marriage should be institutionalized. And then when I went to college, I sort of I thought I was okay. I think most of us think we're okay until we're not. We all know we've got stuff, and I just completely decomposed. I just rotted right there in front of myself. I lost my shit. I got kicked out of college. Was unable to have relationships with anybody, men or women. So I couldn't have friends and I couldn't have lovers. I tried, but it backfired. And I got into just the darkest place that I could ever imagine. And I ended up being disowned by both sets of my families. They had marriages at that point and families there, and completely lonely, just completely lonely. I'd had everything stolen from me through being a drug dealer, and it was, it really couldn't have gotten any worse. And I hitchhiked down to Balboa Park, and I was homeless there for a few months. And some guy there named Todd was a stained glass artist, and he took me in his little place next to the zoo there. And he said, "Hey man, I'd love to make love with you, man. You're beautiful. And, but I'm not going to touch you. Like, it's totally up to you. But, here's a room. I got a house in the other, but I stay here sometimes, but there's a bed here and you're welcome to stay here, man, for as long as you like." And just a beautiful human being. So he helped me get back on my feet, and I backpacked through Mexico with this young guy from Germany. And then I decided, man, I got to make it up with my parents, because, I love them and they love me. And it's been a rough road for them for sure. They were scared. And so I made up with them, and I reapplied to school, but I got back into school, but I thought, there's something else here for me. I don't know what it is. So I ended up on this 84-acre farm, this beautiful farm. This guy was able to just do whatever he wanted with it, because he was independently wealthy. So he didn't care how much money he spent. So he made it, you could eat this soil. It was so freaking good. So I helped him, and I ended up wanting to live in nature. So I'm going to live in the woods here. So I built this platform out in the middle of nowhere, and I just climbed up that thing, and every night, that's where I lived. And I ate the food that we grew, and it was primarily melons, watermelon. So watermelon, honeydew, cantaloupe, and it was so highly mineralized and had so much love in it. We were studying Ann Wigmore, Hippocrates Institute, Out of Cure Cancer. We were studying a guy named Johnny Love Wisdom. He's got 7 PhDs, and he's just off the charts in terms of what the body is made up of, all the different energetic systems and what's needed. And I found myself just naturally just eating the watermelon. And it was this yellow fleshed melon. It was incredible. You just stick a fork in it and it popped open. You didn't even need a knife. And it was like crystals. It was like God inside there.
Wow.
Wow.
And And 6 months later, I realized all I've been doing has been eating watermelon. And I'm completely focused. My energetic body, I've never had more energy. My capacity to understand people and really to understand their thinking sometimes when they're not even speaking, to understand myself, my connection to creator, my connection to nature. It's just like, this happens through eating watermelon? Right? What is going on here? And right about that time, this guy came and he started working on the floor. He said, "Hey man, you got to meet this guy, Chief Little Summer." And I was like, "Dude, I'm not. It's no way. I'm not a guru guy. Like, that's not my scene." And he's like, "No, man, no, he's not. He's not like that. And not." And finally, he just was relentless. He would not stop. And so I went with him one night and I met this guy, and I was like, "Wow, this guy is like a mountain of a human being. He's completely like innocent and joyful and playful." And but man, I would never want to mess with this guy. You could just feel that, like, deep inside that mountain, that guy's going nowhere. Like, he's just. So I fell in love immediately. I'm like, wow. And his wife, Lord Might Raid, this beautiful human being. She's still on the planet. He's helping the planet. And so I just said to myself, well, I'm going to find out what this guy's all about. So he said, we sit down and kind of a council on Thursdays, and, why don't you show up? So I sit down and we start doing this I am chanting, which is just amazing. I do it to this day, the way that he shared it with us. And then he starts opening this book and he starts reading this information. This was like 1986 or something. And I'm like, whoa, all this information is exactly spot on. And then he just goes off script and he starts just talking completely from a direct connection with this work. And so, I go up afterwards, I take a look at the book and it says the law of one on it. And I said, what is this? I'm 18. I'm just like, I'm fresh off the boat, man. And he said, if you'd like to sit in a private council with me, then, I can give you a sense of really what's behind this. And I said, sure. And so we made a point. We sat down together, and I sat down with him, and he said, well, the first thing I do is I'm going to align and balance my chakras with yours, with your permission. And that allows me then to have a conscious connection between our higher selves, so we can actually talk to each other from higher self to higher self. And I said, absolutely. So we aligned and balanced our energy centers, and his body disappeared.
Whoa.
Wow.
And yeah, I said, whoa, initially, but then this crazy thing happened in my head. I said, this is the most natural thing, and this is the way that things are supposed to be. Like, this is actually what's happening. There's a body there, but there's also not a body there. And then instead of his body, initially there was this pyramid. His body was a pyramid instead. And on top, where his head or eyes should be, was just this incredible, beautiful eye gazing at me. And all the time he's just continuing to talk. So I can tell, like, there's still an entity there. It was unbroken connection during the whole time, and very relaxed conversation about us connecting and my future and so forth. And what was living on my heart is questions that I had. And then I could see this pyramid sort of have light coming from behind it. And so I just thought, well, maybe I should mention this, And like, it didn't occur to me until then, but I just thought, so I just said, I just want to mention that, like, I'm seeing a pyramid with an eye on top of it with like two lights coming. He said, oh yeah, the two lights, this is my guide, and he named his guide, and this is my other guide. And it's just like, it's beautiful to be with you. And I just was like, see, I knew it was normal. I knew if I said it, he would just be like matter of fact about it. Like, yeah, this is the way it is. And, a little bit of stink when I had that conversation with Paul Chek, like 3 hours later, his wife's in the background banging pots and pans and like trying to get us out of being connected together. And we heard so much laughter. I mean, it was it was hilarious. I've never really imagined how much joy is on the spiritual path, and how much connection and how much love. And it was just, and at the same time, it was completely normal. I recognize this. I remember this is the way it's supposed to be. And so all of that early childhood of, sort of being in the Christian faith with the work we were doing there. I mean, it was well-meaning. It was definitely well-meaning, but it wasn't effective. It wasn't transformational. And so that's how I met the Law of One. And then very soon after, I met Steiner's work. And when I met Steiner's work, I placed it within the milieu of the Law of One, because the Law of One has certainly a larger perspective. But what Steiner brought was there was actually a human being on the planet doing this work, whereas Ra just visited a couple of times, and they did a little bit of work here. They got back in the light spaceship, and they sort of looked at each other, and one said to the other, like, that didn't go too well, did it?
Right.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, I mean, that's really my work. I've ended up being president of a 24/7 autism care facility, where we did amazing work based on Steiner's perceptions. And that facility is still in existence in California. And I was president of Rudolph Steiner College, which trained teachers around the world to work with children and in Waldorf education. I've been a yoga instructor and worked in academia for quite a bit. If you guys, if you ever think about having a baby, I ended up being a professor of pre and perinatal psychology, which is a fancy word for what happens in the womb at the moment of conception and then beyond that. And that's a completely different story of the birth of my son, that my wife felt literally when she orgasmed, she was touched by a higher being. And she said that right in that moment of orgasm. And that was our son coming.
Wow.
And then one of the women I was working with, one of the students, when she first met me, she said to me, she said, "Are you pregnant?" And this was months before we were pregnant. And I thought she was a little crazy, And I said, no, like, first of all, I'm a guy. And second of all, at that point, I didn't want to have children. And I had mentioned that to you guys. I had no interest in having kids. And the next time I saw her, she said, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "No." And she just looked at me and dead in the eye, and she said, "You will be."
Wow.
And yeah, I just thought she was nuts, so much so I didn't say anything to my wife when I got home. And then we had a cervical cap. We were both 45 years old. She was not fertile at the time we were making love. Spermicidal jelly, you name it. And she came to me after we made love, and she showed me the flattened cervical cap. It was just like a complete, like there was nothing there. It was so thin. We looked at each other. We knew exactly what happened. And then I saw that woman's face, like in my mind's eye.
Oh, wow.
And, "You will be." And I was like, and the crazy thing, I went to her and I said, with all this amazement, "How did you?" and all this. And it was just like that chief experience. She looked at me. She said, "I just know these things." It was like drinking a cup of coffee. Like, yeah, I just know these things. Like, let's have a conversation about something else. That is just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so those experiences in my life have given me this picture that I'm not looking for bells and whistles. I'm not looking for fantastic lights going off. And that's why that nobody and nothing and nowhere piece, that spaciousness piece, really gives me a sense of being present and being ready for whatever happens. Like this conversation, this part of me wants to like put all the things that I want to say to you guys down on a huge list. And in fact, I did that, but that doesn't have anything to do with the relationship that we have together. I can send you the list.
Yeah, I totally feel that.
Yeah, we'll take the list. We'll take it all.
We'll take it all.
You can have it. You can have it.
Yeah.
Keep going, because this is just so great. What a beautiful backstory.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's so appreciated, and I resonate with the. We grew up Christian. We grew up evangelical Christian, and I left a little more abruptly than Mimi did, and I can definitely now look back and see some of the bright spots and have gratitude for that space. But it wasn't until work like Law of One where I heard it. I listened to it, in fact, out of nowhere, with having a very minute spiritual life altogether, and there was something just wildly resonating about it. I mean, I thought it was weird. I was so out. It was so out of context for me. I'm like, what? They're channeling this like entity? What, an alien? Like, what is this? At the same time, what was being articulated felt like it just struck me at my core, which I never ever felt through kindergarten through college in a Christian environment.
Yeah.
And we had recently just got back together. We're childhood sweethearts. We got married, divorced, spent 3 years apart, and had recently reconciled at this moment. This was about 5 years ago. And I was like, babe, I don't know what I just listened to, but this was profound.
Yeah.
Like, this was absolutely profound. And it's both since then been a transformative work for us. And there is something about those moments where you recognize something so far beyond your rational mind that it just bypasses any sort of filtering, and it's just like a chord is struck within your body that something is true.
It felt like to me as I was reading, which it took me about 8 months to get through both books because I was, line by line, and then I would stop and think. And so it took me a long time to actually get through the material. And as I was reading, there were specific points where I remember it felt like something was clicking into place. It felt like almost like when you go to the chiropractor and it feels a little like, and then they do one movement and it clicks into place and you're like, oh, wow. Oh my God, so much. You just feel it in your body. That's how I felt, was like a puzzle piece clicking into place where I had never heard it articulated this way, but something about it felt like a remembering, not an initial learning. And it was easy to say as I was reading, like, oh, yeah. And it was the first time that I felt like I had an effective framework for the existence of good and bad, light and dark, good and evil, and why things happen the way that they do, and how we can evolve ourselves, like almost like a roadmap. And, I could go on and on, of course, but it was the first time where I felt like there was actually a framework that made sense for why things happen the way that they do. Yeah. Previously in the church, there is a sort of a diluted explanation, but it's sort of like God works in mysterious ways.
It's just contradictions all over the place.
And so it's so vague that there can never be that clicking into place because it's a puzzle piece that fits no other puzzle piece because it's so vague. And Law of One felt like clicking into place for me.
Yeah. I resonate with both of what you're sharing about that work.
Maybe we can, because our audience has heard a little bit about Law of One, but maybe from your perspective, Edmund, since we've talked about Steiner and we've talked about Law of One, if you could give the elevator pitch for both the what anthroposophy is Steiner's like spiritual.
Nobody can pronounce it, man. Don't worry about it.
That's his spiritual science, correct?
Yeah.
And then this Law of One, and from your perspective, how you looked at both of these, and maybe just a general definition of each one, and how you've seen them woven together.
I haven't seen them woven together in all of my work in Waldorf for the past 35, 40 years. I've never spoken to anybody about the Law of One, and I've never had anybody bring it up to me.
Interesting.
That's an interesting piece, because when Jared and I started talking about could we work together in some way with men online, he brought this idea, and he totally assumed the same thing you did, that I've been maybe promulgating this, or that there are people who are doing this work, and there may well be, but I haven't met them. I haven't had those conversations. The idea, like you said, of ET channeling in the Waldorf community, I've never seen it with Ra or anybody else. And so I simply wove that work together myself, and didn't really even talk about it with my wife, although she has a strong connection to the Law of One. And so that's an interesting thing, and it's exciting for me. I'm getting all like, woo! Can't even talk anymore. Getting so excited thinking about how to weave those two things together with Jared and with folks. And so we will do that. I would say for me in my own life, how did I do that? The context of Ra and the evolution of not just of humanity, but of creation is the backdrop against which I see Steiner placed within that. And so Steiner was inside of it looking out and speaking from that place. And Ra was outside of it looking in and speaking from that place. And so there's this beautiful thing called the Tao, Tau, and there are two faces on the Tao, and both of them look up toward heaven, but one of them looks up this direction and one the other. It's just one of the most beautiful sculptures that I've ever seen on the planet. And I hold a picture in a way that Steiner is this one face and that Ra is this other. And the two of them, it's like two lights beaming and radiating love to all creation, from the perspective of being on the earth, and then from the perspective of being outside of oneself. And that's not to say that Steiner didn't spend a lot of time from the outside looking in while he was embodied, because that's what his life path was about, was the idea of karma and reincarnation, which is that the three of us, you two and I, have been on this planet so many times together, and we have this beautiful veil that gets placed between us each time we get to see each other again. And the lessons that we didn't quite move to this place of being unswayed are the lessons that we get to play out again. And that's just the fun. That's the real game. You know, you talked about the competition game of like those who are elite and manipulate others in the world, and maybe like, you know, fighting against that. But the real game, I think, is how do we recognize our connection to individuals? And so that was what Steiner brought. He said, when you first see another person's eyes on this planet, you get a flash of everything about that person. It would be sort of Heinlein's way of saying you rock everything about who that human being is in a flash, in an intuitive flash. And then it completely evaporates, and the rest of your experience is the capacity to unpack, to like a rose's petals, to grow and unfold what you saw in that flash of a moment. And those are the kinds of things that Steiner is looking for. And so when I met my wife, for example, we immediately looked into each other's eyes. It wasn't like we said, let's sit down and do this. It was, again, that natural thing. It's organic. And all of a sudden, she grew this huge, ruddy red face with this red beard and red Viking hair. And she was just massive. And I was this beautiful woman she was looking at. And we found ourselves up on a house in Scandinavia. And then we watched her drown in the ocean, and our two children be left with them. And we were like, okay, all right. And then this Chinese businessman interaction that we had, and then being daughters of a native chief in a Sioux life. And this is the thing he's looking for, is what were the places that you didn't get to integrate, that you left the life and there wasn't an opportunity? And how can you come back and make yourself aware of those things and then do that integration? That was really why he came. That was what his life purpose was. Now, to juxtapose Ra's purpose, you know, when you ask Ra what he does, you know what he does all day long? And I say he, but that's sort of, silly. Yeah. Because, it's 6.5 million beings who are one being, who are so in love with each other in creation that they are willing to have every thought, every emotion, and every action be revealed to all the other 6.5 million in every moment. You know what they do all day long? They radiate love to all of creation. Yes.
Sounds pretty good.
So I mean, when you ask, like, what's the purpose? That's Ra's purpose. And he says 90% of creation is able to receive that love. 90%. And we're talking creation. Not just one planet or or universe, but multiverses and what lies beyond that. And it's an infinity. And so his capacity for that, it's a practice that I took up once I found out, you could do that.
Yeah, I it's sort of hard to wrap your mind around that that's even a possibility, of course. But um, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Rudolf Steiner, the man, and what he did here and what he taught, could you give us, just a basic foundation of who Rudolf Steiner was, the man, and how did he contribute in the physical 3D world? How did he contribute to humanity while he was here in that lifetime?
Okay. You want me to answer one of those boring questions?
I want our listeners to have the foundation of where we go further in the conversation and to know who Rudolf Steiner, the physical man, the entity was while he lived here.
I'm being funny.
I love it.
Silly. When Steiner was a boy, he saw a woman. His dad worked in the railway station, and he saw a woman, and he didn't know what the connection was with this woman, but she was pretty ethereal, and she didn't say anything. And he was, probably about 7 years old, and he later heard that at the moment he saw that woman, his aunt had committed suicide, taken her life, and he would have had no way of knowing that. And he recognized, as a 7-year-old, say nothing to anyone. But he also recognized, okay, there's something that happens for me that doesn't happen for other people, as far as I'm aware yet. That was the first and most significant event in his life, where he recognized, I have the capacity to see what's here in front of me, but I also have the capacity to see what's not in front of me, or what's in front of me in a different way. And so that sparked in him this interest to study mathematics. And he studied mathematics and the biological sciences to the extent where he could think through from what I would say is geometry to sacred geometry, to the capacity to build an incredible building that's still listed among architects as one of the most amazing feats of the 20th century, the Gurtian. And then after it burned down, building a second one. So he was able to create, through mathematical thinking, a connection to the spiritual world, and then able to share that connection. So the first thing he did that was of significance is, after World War I, he tried to provide the world with what he called a threefold social order that had what the French Resistance had. It had liberty, fraternity, equality. But it had more than that in all of these three different domains of the human being. But the world had a different aim in mind. They wanted to carve up the different nations and exploit all the natural resources in each of them. America at the head of that, but certainly the G5 or G7, they had the picture of how to gerrymander those pieces. And so he was left with this image of how humanity could really develop with no real way of figuring out how to do it. Then there were workers around Germany who needed to figure out what to do and how to orient themselves to the world. So he started talking to these workers, and one of them owned a cigarette factory. And the guy said, I want you to help educate my workers' kids, because this is the way that we're going to change humanity. These adults who are in politics, they've already got their picture of the way the world is made. But kids are like gods. They're open, they're beautiful, they're ready. And these kids that are disadvantaged, that are from the lower economic sector, why not start with them? And he said, absolutely. And he also made it co-ed, which was completely unheard of in that time. And he also said to the German government, you will give me no restrictions. And they will say, we'll give you all kinds of restrictions, because we're the German government. But what he negotiated is, he said, I get to choose all my own teachers. And he didn't choose any teachers who had any kind of training whatsoever, except kind of like his. They had training in one area of thought that they had clearly distinguished a kind of openness for. And he invited them in, and he started this school. It was called Waldorf, because the name of the factory was the Waldorf factory. And after he created that, he realized that nutrition is a huge piece of what's necessary. And so all of the things that happened that he created, none of them were something that he said, hey, I've got this great idea, God, I want to put this thing on the map. It was people coming to him, banging on his door relentlessly and saying, they're starting to spray our crops with stuff that's making us all sick. This is horrifying stuff. What are we going to do? He said, this is what you do. You make a connection with the cosmos as well as the earth, and this is called biodynamics. And organics was a lower level spin-off of that. But the notion of biodynamics is consonant with something like, if you read the book Anastasia, which is also ironically a channeled book. Anastasia was this book written by this very well-to-do businessman in Russia who ended up making love to this woman in the middle of the boreal forest up in the middle of nowhere in Siberia, where she wore almost nothing and just lived in the wild. And he just thought, man, I've struck gold. And then he realized, oh my God, she's a teacher and I'm fucked. And he completely became her student, and he wrote another 8 books. But one of the things she talked about was that her capacity to work telepathically with individuals who had little home gardens. And he said, Steiner, as well as this teacher, Anastasia, who really comes out of a Tibetan and I think an Atlantean lineage, that the task is to grow our own food with love, or to have it grown by people who love us. And it's the energy in the food, and maybe it's the supplements. It doesn't matter what we're taking, but to know those human beings, to love them and to have them love us, to have them love the alchemical process of moving from seed to table, but really moving from love to love, from their love to our love. And then we create, through destruction of these substances, consciousness. And this is what Steiner was all about. And he said the cosmos plays an active part in this. So biodynamics would be the second thing that I would say is a huge piece of what he brought. The third piece is there were doctors who were just banging down his door, trying to figure out, how do we heal? How do we work with human beings? And he brought anthroposophical medicine. Those are the 3 that I would say are the deepest. He was also just an incredible artist in so many different mediums. And he said that the human being, to be an artist, and that's why Waldorf schools have so much art in them, not so much to become an artist, but to think artistically, to feel artistically, to move in the world artistically, to have that kind of nobility. Those are the pieces that he brought to us. And the Waldorf school, he understood that relationship is everything. And so in the primary years, you have the same teacher who teaches all of the main subjects from 1st to 8th grade. So you get to know the parents, you get to know the children in an incredibly deep way. And there's obviously a karmic connection there. And that the teacher is forced to be one step ahead of the students at every moment, because it's always a new curriculum for her. My wife's a 5th grade teacher right now, and my son is in that class. Mm-hmm. And so it's, we've been 30 years just in this movement, and the beauty of that work never ceases to amaze me. So that's what I would say about, who he was and what did he bring. He gave over 6,000 lectures and wrote over 50 books. You couldn't digest his work in a lifetime. It's the same level of density as the raw material, probably worse, because at least raw was not being translated into English from German. And so unless you speak German, and even if you do, you're listening to German spoken through him. Steiner was a conscious channel. I mean, he was spoken through by Michael. He didn't come through with this stuff on his own. He was awake enough to know what the good dope was and to share that. And when he was off, he said, course correct.
Yeah.
So to give you a little picture of what he brought.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And again, it's like we could talk all day about the things that he's done and said. And I similarly had a familiarity with him through Waldorf, through our upbringing, which was mainstream. Most towns have a Waldorf school, and you hear like, oh, it's a Steiner school, and that's what you hear about. And you're like, oh, Rudolph Steiner school. But I had no depth as it pertained to how much he was involved in. And as we stepped into the health and wellness space, was familiar or began getting familiar with biodynamics, and I was like, oh my God, the Rudolph Steiner guy's behind this too. This is nuts. And then we get into meeting Paul Chek, and we're learning about Lucifer and Ahriman and how much of this just wildly profound articulation of these energies in the world, and how spot on it is with some of the things that have now manifested in the current reality that we live is just nuts. And so much of it's rooted in his genius. And what I would love to maybe we can get into the Waldorf realm and get into some Waldorf related questions, and through your experience in that educational system, but would love to come back around to some of these other areas that Steiner spoke of, including Christ consciousness and these Luciferian and Ahrimanic forces that are amongst us as well. But from the Waldorf side of things, so I would imagine Steiner's schools after his death sounds like they scaled. Sounds like they scaled and have reached the communities of surely the culture that we came out of, because I see Waldorf schools all the time. Do you sense, or have you sensed in your experience, that the schools maintain their authentic tie to what the initial intention of the Steiner school really was during Rudolph's era?
Ooh, nice question. I love you guys' questions. The Steiner schools have been strongly under attack, just like everything else has. But they've been under attack since the Nazis. They've been under attack since the materialistic philosophers and scientists of Steiner's time, who some of them made it their life's work to attack Steiner's work. And Steiner had to end up trying to defend himself against that work. There are still individuals who certainly do that, and I've read those individuals. I know the shadow of Steiner, just as I know somewhat my own shadow. We always see other shadows than our own easier. Thank God for my friends. But the attacks have meant that individuals who, and this is really interesting, the smarter you are in the world now, the easier it is to manipulate you.
What a paradox.
And what I mean by smart is I mean intellectually smart. And so one of the things that Steiner really shared with us is the way to educate is through, he didn't use this word, but again, the translations are tough, but I would say intelligence. That intelligence always carries with it a sense of love and responsibility and freedom. Whereas the intellect is a little bit like you used the word angst earlier, or anxious. That the etymology of those words literally mean to narrow, and you nailed that when you talked about using those words. You narrow your perception, you narrow your breathing, which Steiner says is actually just enlivened thinking, and that thinking itself is breathing. So that's an interesting possibility. So the challenge has come to Waldorf teachers, and I would say to Waldorf organizations worldwide, to figure out where they stand, especially in things where it was extremely clear when he talked about substances that could be used for human beings that doctors would be willing to take money, bribes, basically for, or threats if they're not willing to take bribes. Threats to lose their jobs or have their families harmed, or those things. But those things have been on the planet for a long time. So the challenge there is that Steiner made that quite clear, that these are nefarious to life. They're biotoxins. They result in cell death, and worse than that. And this is the thing I think it's really important to recognize is, when you become a Steiner teacher, you assume, hopefully, and this is less and less in our secular society, you assume responsibility for, in a way, the life of this individual throughout her whole lifetime. And part of the meditations you have on a child is, what was her birth like? What was the preparation for her birth like, if there was one? Sometimes there's not. What was her early childhood like before she came to me? And then how do I envision the things that I am doing and saying and the person that I am with her affecting her when she is now going to be 15, 20, 30, 40? When she comes to the end of her life, how will what I have done now, what responsibility do I need to be aware of in how I speak with her, in the way that I look at her, in how I call upon her? And then some Steiner teachers take that to the level of, what did this individual bring with her? And how can I help take responsibility for that and help her remove the obstacles that will enable her to step into herself and her destiny? And then for teachers who really take an interest in human beings in front of them, where will this being end up? When this entity returns, it will no longer be Susie or Edmund, or those personalities come and go, but the entity itself returns. And what capacities, what is this entity asking for in order to be able to unfold itself in the world? That's the real essence of what a teacher is always looking for. And the curriculum is just sort of a ruse.
Yeah.
All the curriculum does is it goes through the evolution of humanity. So the historical curriculum, you're looking, when you bring Egypt, for example, to see, are you sensing a connection? This individual is remembering something through their time in Egypt when I'm sharing this work.
Wow.
So your evening preparation is not about factoids. It's about meditating on your children. What is it that this particular individual needs? Or what did this class come together to learn? So some things will be individual and some things will be class-wide. And that's the meditation you take into sleep. And the first thing you do upon awakening is to reflect on what are the symbols, like that, microcelia you got behind you.
Yeah.
Right? What are the symbols that are being revealed to me through that? And then how do I figure out what to bring? And that's why being a Waldorf teacher is terrifying, because the curriculum is the human beings in front of you. The other stuff is just so much. It's like I said, I could email you the list I made up, but our connection together is why we're here. We're in bodies to be in bodies, to love these bodies, to love this earth, and to pull down and draw the spirit into it, but not to go out seeking. That's there'll be plenty of time for that. Out of time, actually. And so that's a high calling, Chase.
Yeah.
And it's easy to be distracted away from that high calling.
Right.
And it's easy. The three things that Steiner said will distract us from that are hatred of the spiritual world, doubt of the spiritual world, and fear of the spiritual world. And so when you go to interview your teacher with your young one in tow, those are the questions I would form around is, how does this individual look at children? What is her conception of how she creates curriculum? And what's her relationship to fear, to doubt, and to hatred?
Wow. Beautifully deep. Wow.
What comes up for me as you're speaking is we have mentioned to you, and our listeners know this, that we've had more conversations over the last year about building a family and having a child, and the preparation work, not only on the, okay, what do we need to change in our condo, but also like reflecting in our inner world, like what do we need to address individually and together before we create a human, right?
Yeah.
And so we've had more conversations around this in the last year than we ever have. And so schooling is something that comes up, especially as you hear about sort of, I'm going to use the word, the horrible things happening in the public school system. In my opinion, they seem pretty horrible for the development of children. And I can't help but think that what you're describing is the basically antithesis of what is happening in general in the public school system. In the public school system, as I view it, we are, I'm using that word loosely, we are basically hoping and expecting a child to conform into the system. What's already there, what's already created, what's already here, the template that we've had, the cookie cutter that exists and has existed for hundreds of years, you're going to move into that and you are going to shape yourself to fit that mold, to be a successful employee and civilian, basically. And what you're talking about is the school and the teacher forming around the child, the individual, not only this life, but maybe past lives and future. And that is, I think, it's beautiful. It's like, this sounds like a fairy tale, how beautiful it is. I just wanted to highlight that how different that approach is than what probably most children are experiencing. I don't know if you wanted to add something.
Well, I would only add a question to say that, in your experience, Edmund, what are you seeing from the kids and the families that are Waldorf educated versus those that you've seen, that don't partake, that either go to public school or even like we went to a private Christian school, but basically aligned with public school curriculum outside of the Christian aspect. What are these primary differences that you're seeing both in school and then as they become alumni?
Well, I'm a very practical person, so it helps me to work off of examples.
Yep.
So I recently had a conversation with a group of high schoolers, and they're Waldorf, and it's a brand new Waldorf high school here in Sandpoint, and they're different ages. They're 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. And I sat down with them, and in so many words, I said to them, I'm not going to lead this conversation, and there's no topic. So there was an initial kind of twittering and goofing around and, posturing and kids trying to be as cool as possible and crack jokes and then talk about how, well, this is kind of weird because it's kind of like a, therapy session or something like that. And after they had front loaded all of those things, I just said, I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes for 60 seconds and think about a question that's living for you, any question whatsoever, and just write it down on this note card, put it in the middle of the circle here, face down. I'm going to pick them up. I'm going to read them. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to identify who they are, and you guys aren't either. If you think you know who asked that question, that's not the point. Decide which question you want to talk about, and I'm going to love to listen. And that's what's possible in individuals who have had, even though they still devolved into taking hands and having me be a leader for like 2 or 3 hands, and then I just go, guys, you see what's happening here? Every time I take your hand, who do you look at after I call on you when you speak? Yeah, me. Why are you looking at me? I'm not even a part of this conversation. But the fact that you're giving me the power to take your hand, to call on you, you see how that works? You see what we do? And we call this education. No, this is disempowerment.
Yeah.
We're sitting in a circle here. I'm at a lower level because I don't know what your questions are, what your life experience is. And so I'm here to learn from you. And so this looked at each other like we're not used to this. And even in Waldorf schools, they weren't used to it. And I consider that a disservice. This is something that should be practiced from early on. The capacity, Steiner said, question me on everything. Question me on, experience it for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. Take nothing of take nothing. I didn't take anything of what anybody else said. So I expect the same out of you. I'm not looking for followers. I'm looking for leaders. And so that is something that if I sat down in a public school, unless it were a pretty amazing public school, they would look at me like I'm from Mars. And they were able, by the end of a pretty short session, and I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of time with them because it was a tight schedule, and they just said, hey, would you come in? Because actually what they wanted me to come in and talk about was alcohol use.
Sure.
And I meditated on that, and I thought, sure, I mean, I could talk about what happens to the etheric and astral and I being during alcohol use and what communities did, and I could go on and on about it. But is that really what is being asked for? Why do people make an agreement with the spirit of alcohol? From a historical perspective, a god brought it down to the Greeks in order to drive us into our bodies because the Greeks were so far out that they needed to come in. Now we're so far in, we don't need alcohol. So Steiner says things out of time become evil. So the wine was exactly what it needed to be when it came. And now it's not. But what is it that young person is looking for? when they move toward marijuana or alcohol. They do opposite things energetically, but in the wine in particular, they're looking for connection. So I said to myself, these kids need a time to have connection. They need the power to be able to have real conversations with each other. And what I find is then they have the capacity for it. And not only do they have the capacity for it, Chase, they have the capacity to go far beyond what I have the capacity for once they pick up the reins on it. So that by the end of it, they were saying things that I thought, my God, like if I were only, I was 14 years old, oh my God. I mean, I'd been doing roars and lemons and marijuana since I was 9. I've been drinking gallons of wine. I had no idea like how to have a conversation with anybody, and much less have the kind of vulnerability that they had. So when they move on and when individuals interview them to either work with them or maybe to have some kind of higher education or mentorship, those individuals always came back to me, especially when I was teaching high school for those years. And they would say, when do I get more of these kids? Because they know who they are. They know how to express themselves with vulnerability that is sheer power. They have a joy of life and learning. They're inveterate learners. There's no way I could drive learning out of them. I couldn't even imagine it. And so they don't have to unlearn anything. And with the rest of my students, I'm looking at automatons, which is really Armand's dream. I'm looking at consumers, future consumers, present consumers, consumers of the internet, consumers of stuff, working for somebody else rather than creating new things in the world. So that's the biggest difference I've seen, and it's been very consistent since 1989 when I met my wife at the Waldorf School and we started teaching together.
Amazing.
That's so cool. It's it seems like, in short, they're not teaching you what to think, but how to think, which I know is a well-worn phrase. But does that resonate with what you know about Waldorf? Like how to think, how to learn, maybe is a better way to phrase it, rather than just putting stats and facts and figures in front of your face and expecting you to memorize it and then spit it out on a test to show that you're smart and show that you can take orders and show that you can regurgitate what we want you to. It's like how to think, how to learn, how to be enthusiastic and curious about learning.
I would say they already know how to learn. I would say they already know how to think. It's giving them the space to unfold that. And it's bringing incredible enthusiasm to anything that you bring, so that when they learn about Egypt, for example, they learn about the particular human beings, not the events. If it's events, it's what a human being went through. And so they learn the soul of the individual who was there at that time. And again, there's a specific reason for that, because we want them to realize, once I'm there, did I interact? Did I hear the teachings or have a connection with this individual who lived her life during this time and who brought something? If you just bring facts, they're not going to be able to find that connection. And it's that, as you said, with the Law of One, we're looking to inspire that eternal memory to awaken in them, that I am more than this being in this time. And that I have something to bring. I have a gift to bring from that time into this time. So anything else is just a factoid. That's the intellectual piece that brings no joy to learning whatsoever. And so when they come into a new learning situation, they're coming with that lens of, I need to learn that which I need to know.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. I need to learn that which I need to know.
And so that's almost this role of the student. And it sounds like the teacher is this facilitator of the remembrance. And maybe around what is the role of the parent in this framework? And if there's anything else to add as well with the role of the teacher or the student, but under the Waldorf domain, what are these these specific and intended roles for student, teacher, parent?
Steiner always suggested that with any kinds of deep relationships like this, especially ones that are going to be completely irrational, parents are completely irrational when it comes to their kids. A teacher needs to know that and needs to have a heart for that and needs to be able to be a loving guide for that and needs to be real. And so the shadow of Waldorf would be this kind of pretension that I have all of this wisdom of the book of Rudolph Steiner when none of us do, because only Rudolph Steiner did. And he's gone. He's been dead 100 years. So that ain't never happening. I just got me. And I got the best that I can bring. And so having the teacher be real around that keeps the sort of craziness that happens in Waldorf schools at bay. The craziness of like the teacher almost like a goddess or a queen, and so much in charge of that relationship with the child that the parents feel like accessories. And that's part of what your interview with them is sussing out. Are they comfortable enough in their own skin, or are they pretty brittle, pretty didactic, pretty rigid in Steinerisms? Do they study more than just what Steiner brought? Because there are a lot of other amazing teachers who've been on this planet. There's a lot more to look at than Steiner. And so if that's the only lens they're using, that's pretty myopic. And they're going to have this solipsistic picture of the way that they present themselves and the world. And so you're looking for a teacher who has openness and who has humility. Because as parents, you need the space to be able to go, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much every day, all day long, or I just fucked up again. I did this, I said this. And you're looking for a relationship with a human being who can say, whew, yeah, I've been there, or I have no idea either. And let me sleep on that for a couple of nights, and then let's have another conversation. But somebody that you're in the doghouse with, you're just like, man, like I want to be this kid's dad, but lately not so much. It's not happening, and I can't figure out how to get from here to there. Those are the real conversations that you want to have, not like I got everything together, because I haven't met somebody on the planet who's got everything all together. And if I did, they'd be so bored.
Yeah.
So bored.
No doubt.
Right.
And it'd be tough not to be cynical. I don't think there are any Galahads on the planet. And so we're all, like Rumi says, none of us have gone far. And it's the truth. None of us have gone far. Steiner had a lot of stuff that he could have improved on, and he will, right? And there are a lot of critics in the world. And I just say, for somebody who does so much, the more you do, the more people have the capacity to criticize it. And so the art critics who like to criticize other people's art, I mean, if we had no art critics in the world, how many more people would try their hand at writing fiction or poetry? Nobody in the world is going to say anything but this is awesome, right? How many would start drawing and painting? How many would play music? How many would sing? How many creators on the planet would we start having if we just took the critic piece out? So you want that teacher not to be a critic, not to tear down, but always to build up the relationship with you, to build up the relationship with the child, but not to take over that relationship. You don't want that teacher to become a goddess or a queen, because that starts to affect your relationship with that child as mom at home. That's not healthy. That's not healthy. This is a partnership. You're looking for a third partner.
That's a really good reminder, and something we'll keep in mind as, we're years off, but it's a great nugget of wisdom, because the teacher spends so much time concentrated, and not just for 1 year, 1 grade, if I'm hearing you correctly, but multiple years, multiple grades.
8 years,
yeah. That's a long time to spend with someone, and
yes.
It's worth it to make sure that it's the right partner for what you want to create with as parents, and then with your child as well.
Yeah,
so.
Totally. You mentioned art, and can you go into a little bit around the emphasis of the arts in Waldorf? And from mainstream education, it quickly becomes like an elective, probably like 5th or 6th grade, it's an elective. And if you don't come from a family of artists, like I did not, I came from a family of business folks, and I stopped partaking in art through school by whatever 5th or 6th grade. And then it was like, I didn't touch a damn thing until I was an adult looking for art therapy to heal all my shit.
Right.
But can you talk a little bit about the curriculum and the relationship to art in Waldorf?
Yeah, art is the expression of the soul on the planet. It can't not be. So it's the symbol that can be reflected upon by the individual who's creating it. It can also be reflected upon by the teacher and the parents to look into that soul with always with loving interest, not with interpretation, but to let that piece, whatever it is, ray back into your own consciousness and to give you insight into what that child is expressing non-verbally through that art. And often that nonverbal expression is derived from the first 3 years of life before memory really forms. And those are special years. Those are incredibly special years. And sometimes that art emerges from the time before birth or even a lifetime before. And so the time before birth would be in the womb. So when that little being is inside you, having experiences that are still quite spiritual and hoping to impress those into the world so that she or he can remember why she came. That's the function of art. And the function of art is to have a true soul education always be present it's to enliven the material, always to enliven the material through our capacity hands make us human beings. The capacity for creativity make us human beings. The hands are so incredible. It's, yeah, that's a conversation all on its own.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we're losing handwriting, yes, the wisdom of the flow, the etheric flow of information coming through the human being and then through the hand is a challenge for humanity. It moves us more into the 0-1-0-1 mentality, which is more aramonic. It's more the heart as a beat rather than a rhythm.
Mm.
And so what a rhythm has a little bit of fluctuation and it has a uniqueness. A beat is death. So we're looking for a rhythmic life and we're looking for an imaginative life, especially in the years where the children are doing all of this artwork. And each one of the arts has a different relationship to a sevenfold life process and an organ system. And there's a sevenfold process that would be a series, not even a conversation. And again, Steiner had this capacity to look at unity, to look at duality, to look at threefoldness, to look at fourfoldness, to look at 7 and 12. Those were the primary realities. And I've created vast charts for myself to reflect on in each of these neurological patterns to see how is it that we can move back and forth. The sevenfold sphere that we're talking about for the arts, this life sphere is predominantly in this art sphere time. And that's a time unfolding sequence. That's why history is so important with it. Whereas the 12-fold is a spatial experience. And that's the realm of the 12 senses that we have and the 12 cranial nerves for thinking and the 12 worldviews that we possess in the world. And again, dozens of other connections that are 12-fold, including 12 disciples and why 12 disciples are so important. Those connections are what art accesses. Art accesses the archetypal beings who stand beside us while we're in that classroom doing that art. Archetypal beings interweave with each other. They are all creative and completely open to one another. And these give birth to all of the archetypes that are used in men's and women's groups and in artwork that people try to access. They're trying to get a connection to these archetypal beings. They are all creative. And you're looking for creativity in that child. You want that child to surpass you as soon as possible as the teacher.
Mm.
Wow, what a paradigm shift. Like,
Yeah.
And you just echoing a point you made earlier around questioning authority and how healthy that is. we're told not to, maybe, questions are allowed, right? But there's no like, don't challenge authority. So a kid like me doesn't challenge authority until I adamantly oppose authority. Yeah. And so there's this just radical change when I feel enough in my body as a, teenager to have enough testosterone to give the middle finger to the teacher or the coach or the pastor or whatever it looked like in my life. Fill in the blank for however it resonates for you. But to be encouraged to question and to feel empowered with the potential or the ability to step into a place of having an idea that is worthwhile to share and to massage with another individual, like a teacher or a wise person in your life, to create something that, may be greater than what you thought it could be. Like, geez, what a mind-blowing opportunity. I'm thinking, like, how important is it? Let's say we have a kid in the next year, and we're thinking in the next few years we're leaning towards a Waldorf education. How important is it that we have an understanding of this curriculum? How much we dive into the work such that we can be supportive, not unlike a teacher would be, and even just the right, vernacular and vocabulary and a clear idea of what the path looks like. How important is that in the role of the parent or the family member to the overall success of what this education could be for a kid?
Well, I think the earlier part of what you shared sheds a lot of light on what I would invite you to reflect on, which is even the way that you and I, for example, tend to say, like, question authority and so forth. That's not even what happens in Waldorf, because it doesn't get there.
Right.
It's way before that, where they're in love with life and they're asking questions. They're not questioning anything. You feel the difference there?
Yeah.
And so part of why I'm giving you that as a concept is you and I came from a private school, and then I came from public school. I didn't have Waldorf. And so you can't solve a problem at the same level it was created. And you and I are unconsciously incompetent in a lot of ways. And so the task for us is to become consciously incompetent. Yeah. And then consciously competent. And then unconsciously competent.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll go back and we'll find another blind spot.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what I would say more than anything else is it's a meditative life that is necessary, because you have no idea who you're going to birth. You have no idea what the challenges or questions she or he will bring home, and you don't have to. But what I would suggest is that you have an openness and a kind of a neuroplasticity, a heart kind of resilience, the adaptability of your body to be able to move in any direction you need to at any time. And when you have that capacity for openness, for positivity, for perseverance in the face of challenges, which with children, that's, par for the course. When they find all of your buttons and begin to press them, then you can celebrate the music that comes out rather than the yells or the shutting down. Yeah. And it's that meditative life to be open to know that that's coming, and it does nothing but beautify this relationship with the beauty that the two of you have together.
So good.
There's no content that's needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's the absence of content. We're overwhelmed with content right now.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
And what we're failing to recognize is that every concept is a spiritual being who wants a relationship with us. Every single concept is a being. Stars are just clusters of spiritual beings who have given out so much light, they got to find a home together. So cool to hang out.
Well, you mentioned we're overwhelmed with content. And what comes up for me is, I'd love your perspective on what does a healthy relationship for a kid look like to technology and to devices in 2023. We've got a dependency on it, and from kids through adults, but specifically around kids, what does that healthy relationship look like to the iPad, the computer, the iPhone, and these various technological devices that are so much a part of our lives?
I would say in some ways it's still it's a challenge even in the Waldorf schools, but the practice has always been to really trust that from a learning point of view, you don't give a child anything that they don't have the capacity to understand before you give it to them. So when you can build that computer, then you can use it.
Wow.
Damn. Yeah.
So in Waldorf, you should actually learn to build a computer and learn what are you doing.
Wow.
Otherwise, you become a tool. You are the tool.
Yeah.
That computer is running you, and you're fascinated by it, and you're entertained by it, and you're addicted to it. And you become reduced to being a neurotransmitter, hitting the dopamine response. Bing! Oh!
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
slide.
I actually was just thinking about creating something artistically, but then I got the ding.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you open the dinger to write something, and something pops out at you, and then an hour later you put it down, and you never even got to the thought that wanted to come into the world. So the level of distractibility, the dopamine receptor, the serotonin receptor, we're reducing ourselves to neurotransmitters.
Mm-hmm.
And so when an individual is able to understand grief around death, it takes a while for a kid to really know when something is really gone. Like, what does that mean that grandma's just lying there and not breathing or speaking? That's all I know. But a concept of really death and grieving, there's a certain age where that takes place, and then a conversation, a connection can be there. If people are dying of an earthquake, and you're old enough to understand that and have a bake sale and send money there and do something about it to empower yourself as a human being, then let them know about the death, the destruction. So when you have the capacity to comprehend something, then bring that to that child. If not, it overwhelms them, it disempowers them, it makes them anxious. And once they're anxious, they're in their limbic brain or their amygdala, and the neocortex goes offline and can't reflect spirit anymore.
I mean, and this is not just children that we're talking about.
No.
Of course, because as you're speaking, I'm like, oh God, is he watching me while I open my phone to, write a nice text and I get.
No, I'm watching me. I'm watching me. I fight with that,
It's
I fight with all the things I'm talking about today, just to be super clear.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. And so it makes me think, as we talk about what's a healthy relationship, like who of us even knows what a healthy relationship is with technology? We're doing our best to fill in the major gaps of, I don't know if anyone's an expert in this area.
I've wondered this often, like if we're all sick, who's going to be the one to know we're sick?
Yeah. Yeah, if we're all addicted, and I'm not immune from that. I'm not immune from being reduced to a neurotransmitter, as you say perfectly. It happens to me. And so I become afraid of, or I'm at least thoughtful of it. I won't say that I'm afraid of this, but I'm thoughtful of how this is affecting, our family members and our nieces and nephews, but then our future child. If I am having issues with it and I know that it is causing problems, or I know that I'm addicted to some degree and I'm consciously incompetent, how is this going to affect a child who is not thinking that way?
It's going to be perfect. Have you ever studied any kind of a sport or something?
I mean, yeah, I played basketball and volleyball growing up. And
did you have a good coach?
I mean, he was nice.
Yeah. You know what makes the best coaches? The ones who sucked at the sport and had to understand every single thing that could go wrong. You know who would make the shittiest coaches? natural athlete.
Right.
Ah,
The star
yes.
athlete. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good reframe. Oh my gosh, I see what you did there. Yes. It's something that we have had to learn and to put into place and recognize as a catalyst for our own growth. And that it's not going to be this aha moment where we suddenly get there and we figured it all out with technology. It is an ongoing relationship. As we have a podcasting business, as we sell supplements online, it's never going to be out of our lives. And so that ongoing relationship is a constant ongoing catalyst for our own growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just, man, yeah, it's something that I'm going to have to meditate on and journal about many, many times, I'm sure, as, one of the many topics as we look to be parents. But it's something that we are very thoughtful of, because I see people, that are very close to us, that their technology basically, I actually listened to a book recently. It's called The Soul of Discipline. And it is just incredible, talking about these different stages of development, as the governor, as the gardener, and as the guide, as you parent your child in these different stages, very in line with, from 1 to 7, you're sort of the governor, you're keeping them safe. And then the gardener is when you start to, it becomes a team effort, and you start to, okay, I'm going to hear you out and I will make the final decision, but let's hear you out. And then the guide is more of the teenage years, where you're just kind of sitting back and making sure that what they're doing is in line with their dream, their one love, their objective, their goal, whatever that is. So these different stages. And so I was listening to this book, and he was talking about it can get to a point where the parent is not actually the parent. The parent now is the technology. They are providing, here's what's real, here's what's not, here are the rules of society. And now it sort of places the young child on the level of the real parent. I am now your equal, and I have my own rules in my pocket of what reality is. And the book is outlining, like, how do we avoid that at all costs? Because you want to, hold on to that relationship, that connection with your child. And it's just, it's tying things together for me. And yeah, I guess there's not really a question in there. I'm just making a lot of connections with what you're saying and what I've already learned and have recognized as true.
Well, there are two pieces there that you both have brought. The one piece about you being able to be the guide, the governor of your young one, is that when you're struggling, you're a wounded healer. And we can only really, really bring forward what we have had a wound around, or an addiction, or whatever it is we want to call it, and then been able to work toward healing around that. And as you said, it's an ongoing process. It's not something that, like, oh, I got this now. Like, I don't know what I got in the world right now at 56 years old. Like, not much. A dissertation helps you understand how really stupid you are. You just think, before you do it, you think, oh, wow, I'm going to do this thing. And I'm going to get really informed about this. And at the end you go, oh my God, there's so much to know about this one little tiny piece of the world. And I don't know any of it after 3 years of thinking about nothing.
Yeah. A podcast will also do that, by the way, for us.
Yeah.
Listening to and speaking to people like yourselves and others, it's like, holy crap, I know nothing.
Yeah. So that's the one piece. But what that wounded healer gives you is the capacity not just to teach the child and to know all the stumbling blocks that she'll have along the way of that internet addiction piece, because you've been through them, but also you'll have compassion. You'll have empathy for the teaching that goes on. And this is the most important part of the teaching that the child is most permeable to, is the sense of connection and compassion that you have while you're bringing whatever you're bringing. And this is a little bit goes back to my question that you asked, Chase, about, and I said meditation. It's developing this love for every response that you give. And that love is what that child grows on. I mean, that literally is what the child grows on. The information comes and goes, but the love is what she remembers and what will bring her back to ask more questions, and hopefully to have you not answer them, but to have you live with them, with that young one. And so you empower them to help them understand these answers are for you to find. I could give you what I know, but I don't want you to depend on me, because I haven't been to the Waldorf school. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I mean, we could go for hours, I know, with
Yeah,
you.
I want to get at least one more question around Waldorf that I have, and then I want to leave some space to chat about, some of the work that Edmund's doing in men's spaces. But I would say the last question that I have around Waldorf at this point would be, there's some criticisms around the education, and usually, what my experience with them have been is that it's, hey, you're not getting practical, hands-on skills that will be applicable into being, productive and successful in the world as a businessman or something along those lines. It's for hippies. That's another one that I've heard. It's more feminine and creative and artistic. And so men or males, usually by the time they hit like wanting to compete in sports types of ages, will leave the educational infrastructure of Waldorf. What do you see as other criticisms, and are they valid from your experience?
Okay, great. I have a list for you guys on this one.
Yeah.
I called it like the shadow of Waldorf.
Yeah.
And we touched on it earlier with this idea that this heavy mantle or crown that gets put on the teacher, that she has to know everything and she has to be deeply spiritual, and it's overwhelming. It's crippling. That sense of analysis paralysis that can come in. Like, I'm going to do all this for $50,000 a year.
Right. My God. Yeah.
And then I mean, the funny thing you're saying really about the shadows, that's one of the shadows, is the lack of solid benefits that teachers get, the lack of making enough money to worry about how to pay the bills and feed the kids. And, there needs to be more thought put into the reality of the business of running a school, the administrative aspect. A lot of times teachers graduate into like, well, I don't really want to teach anymore. I've been teaching for 35 years, so now I'll be the administrator. And everybody else loves that, at least initially, because they think, oh, she's going to understand everything. Well, she can understand everything about being in the classroom. That makes you a pedagogical director. That does not make you an administrator. That's a completely separate realm. And a lot of nightmares in Waldorf schools have ensued because of that. To the sort of feminine education, it depends entirely on the Waldorf school that you move into. When I taught in the Waldorf school I was in, the girls basketball team did not lose a game in 14 years.
Wow.
That's competitive.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, there's a shadow to that competition, which is they're playing 100 games out a season. They can't take vacations with their family. They have injuries left, right, and center that just get taped up and get back out there. So they're creating perhaps lifetime injuries. And you've got this amazing track record, but you've got to ask yourself, what does that mean? And so it really depends on the Waldorf school, on the human beings who are in front of you for that kind of thing. So the answer is yes, I've seen those things, and yes, I have not seen those things. And it depends, again, entirely on the ethos of the Waldorf school, the human beings who are there in front of you. I've been inside of probably 65 different Waldorf schools as a consultant. So I've gotten to see the absolute blissful bestness, and I've gotten to see things that I go, holy moly, we're pretty far from the indications here. And Steiner made it really clear that these are indications. These are black and whites, because we're not looking for authoritarianism. We're not looking for this kind of lockstep. And that's why I think the Nazis were not very happy about creative thinking in his school or anybody else's. And so you're hoping for faculties that are connected to the times, that are current. So not this kind of antiquated Birkenstock hippie, peace and love and just artistic. I mean, an artistic process is a rigorous process if you're really engaging in it. It can just be bullshit, scribble some colors on a page, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in 5th grade geometry, you don't get to use a protractor or a compass, and your task is to design a perfect circle again and again and again, and to divide that circle perfectly. and then to shade it perfectly, you're talking about boundaries and perceptions of exquisite focus. This is not hippie.
Right.
You don't smoke a bowl and go in there and go, hey, let's see what I want to, how do I want to express my heart today?
Right. With some paint and crayon.
Divide the circle into 5, into 6, into 7, into 8, and do it as well as you can, and let yourself. There is no, in a certain way, there's no correcting, because that's not the way life is. You don't get to erase. So you're using a permanent pencil. There's this joke around, they say Confucius did his crosswords with a pen. So there is a rigor, but there are some teachers who that rigor may not be present. And again, that's why interviewing your teacher and getting a sense of, you don't want somebody didactic and you don't want somebody hippified. And there's nothing wrong being either one of those, as long as they have the capacity to meet the child where she is, to come out of themselves, because education means to lead forth from where the individual is. And the individual is not you as the teacher. It's the individual in front of you. It's a selfless act of sacrifice.
Well, we're going to be contacting you before we interview any teachers.
I've been on teacher interviews too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's important. It's important.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that's coming up for you before we move the conversation towards a little bit of the time and effort you're putting into men's work? Is there anything, with the Waldorf education or the structure that, is really coming up for you right now that you would want to share?
I think the thing that's living for me right in this moment as you ask that question is Steiner's conception of our capacity for thinking. When he was asked, what's going to be left of you, your legacy? He said, the only thing that'll last is the philosophy of freedom. And for him, the philosophy of freedom, in German, that translates in 3 different ways as the exact same thing. The philosophy of freedom equals the philosophy of thinking, pure thinking. The philosophy of pure thinking equals the philosophy of spiritual activity. So when we're thinking purely, we're thinking freely and thinking spiritually. And the way that he described of how we do that, he used a fancy word called Gemütlichkeit. And what that means is impossible to translate into our language, but it means that there's a kind of a wisdom of the heart, that the intellect is contained inside, and that thinking is alive. He called it many, many different things: living thinking, etheric thinking, heart thinking. He called it so many things because none of those terms actually even gets close to what it is. But he suggested that it is the movement forward for the consciousness soul of the human being from the intellectual sphere of being to the consciousness sphere of being. And if we don't engage the heart in it, we will become the most solipsistic, antisocial assholes that you could ever imagine on this planet. And as you look around and as you look into your own heart, you can see that. You can see that proclivity that we have. There's this kind of movement toward time to myself, or my thoughts to myself, or what I think is paramount. And part of what has contributed to that is the information overload of the internet. And the challenge of bringing children into that too early is they lack the discernment to know good dope from bad dope.
Yeah.
They do not have discernment and they don't have discipline. And when do they actually have that in their lives? It usually develops in high school if you've done a good job helping them to educate themselves. And I don't mean you educating them. I mean helping them to educate themselves.
I know.
And then they have the capacity. They have the discipline. They have the discernment. But right now, what we have is at the touch of a button, any information, any visual pieces. So the pieces of sexuality that have been degraded, you can see them right there as a 3-year-old. All you have to do is click the wrong or the right button. Information that tells you the most heinous things that may or may not be accurate, but you have no way of sussing out from a screen. There's no human being in front of you, the reality of that. And I work with children a lot on how do you understand the truth of something? How do you actually know from a sensory, from a feeling basis, from a thinking basis, when something is true.
Yeah.
How do you know when it's a lie? And we practice these in activities. It's essential. And the younger, the better, because they're more open then to be able to really sense, how is it that a simple statement, I can feel something in myself and know this is real. There's an amazing book by Jacques Lussarin called And There Was Light. He was a blind leader of the French resistance, and 6,000 times out of 6,000 times, he got it right, that the individuals he interviewed were not going to break down the French resistance. And the 6,001st time, you'll have to read the book. But he describes his process of understanding the truth and how he was able to know beyond all certainty, this is real and this is no, this person will bring our work down. So that practice of being able to orient oneself in the world to know the truth. Can you imagine the gift that you give a child when the teacher is bringing something and the teacher doesn't even know it's true or not, but the kid does? Because she's learned to know and to recognize truth. And that's something we can practice, and we should be practicing as soon as possible with young children.
Amen.
I could use that practice all the time as an adult. I mean,
we all can. We have been deceived and manipulated in a very conscious way at an expert level of cleverness through this aromatic tendency that lives in us for at least 100 years in laser focus, and more like 500 years since the birth of the industrial and the birth of the scientific age. This idea that God is dead and that we rely only on the self.
Yeah. Well, I think of even how long it took us to identify real food and how much unlearning it took just for us to be able to understand what real food felt like in our bodies, how to identify real food, because even food that we would see at the grocery store that looks like produce has been through a host of different sequences that has disconnected it from the life that it started out as or ever was. And it took years and years and years after, we didn't have nutrition education or education on what to eat, and we generally ate okay, but it was overall mainstream. But, in the space that we work in, which is a lot in the health and wellness space, there is still a mountain's worth of education that has to happen in order for people to, if they've never looked at it before, identify what is actually life-affirming food for them to consume. And it's this stripping of what was indoctrinated into the way we approach, what we eat, and then a rebuilding of what is actually true, what is actually real from a food standpoint. And I would imagine it's even on even a significantly larger scale when it comes to information. And what we're facing from a world of over information and false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothes, and we are so accustomed to wanting to outsource thinking that we're so lost because we don't know who to follow. But that's not right. Like, that's the problem in and of itself, is we are asking, who do I believe? Who do I follow? And it's like, it's actually you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what you are seeking is what is that phrase that Paul Chek says all the time? Like, what you are seeking is what's seeking. Like, what you're looking for is who's looking.
Yeah. There you go. Awesome. Well, I want to leave some space to talk about, men's work and why this is so relevant for you, why it's so important for you. This is close to home to me. We've got a podcast here. We've got a community of many men who listen, and I've been in long dialogue with a lot of our listeners around the tough times that it is to be a male, and even just masculinity, whether it's female or male, just masculinity at large, and what is a healthy expression of masculinity, and where did we get off track, and how do we reclaim some of these attributes, and what does it mean to be safe and provide and protect and be a leader and have this penetrating, balanced energy into the world. And so all of these things are very, very relevant. But for you, what has men's work meant? What does that practically look like for you? And speak on some of that, if you will.
Knowing that when that raw information was actually being channeled, it was happening up the street from me.
Mm.
And I was down the street getting the shit beat out of me and my whole family. And it was my mom's third husband. He was just like an infant in a 350-pound body, just a lot of rage and a lot of inability to really express himself in the world. And so I had dads that I learned how to be neglected from, where I didn't really exist. I had dads that you never knew if they would just beat the whole family up because of whatever happened to them on that day. And I had dads that were really incredibly intellectual and not in touch emotionally. And that all contributed to me not being able to have really any quality relationships when I went away to college, and not being able to think and just getting dismissed from just one of the finest schools where I had one of the best opportunities ever to connect with human beings. It was a school called New College, and I happened to be there when a guy named Rick Doblin was there at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And so this was a time of incredibly bright, loving individuals experimenting with consciousness. And I left after that experience because I didn't have the pieces I needed. And so what that drove me into after finding the Law of One and finding Steiner's work is I found a man who was about 40 and a man who was about 60, and they really wanted to create a men's group. We were in Ohio at that point. And so we created something called the Western Reserve Men's Council, and there were about 50 men in this group. There was a lot of juice. And we did beautiful things like Fathering the Earth Day. We would create exercises. One of the things I love to do is to create exercises, either for individuals or for groups. This was a birthing canal made of men. So you get 25 men on each side, and the man who was going to move through a birth process through these men. And then the eldest man, Mark, at the end was sitting with a candle and a drum and just had this beautiful rhythm of the heartbeat of the mother. And this was where the man gets to say, this is how I'm going to come into the world. And so some of them wanted to fight like hell and have us restrict. Some of them wanted us to come down on him and he had to crawl through like a commando crawl. A couple of them wanted to dance through and have just incredible amount of space. So we just created this bow for them. And at the end of however each one of those men came through, there was this moment where they were welcome into the world by this elder, with all of the rest of us in a tight circle around this man. And these are the kinds of experiences that are essential for me in men's work, that we create an experience that has meaning and that creates the possibility for transformation. It's usually edgy. A lot of the work involves, for example, eye gazing with one another, and so much can get revealed through eye gazing. Past lives, future lives, present lives, just simply lovingly looking into one another's forehead or eyes or throat chakra. And so the expression of emotions is really, really essential. In the men's groups that I'm in right now, the first thing that we do without any other adornment is we just share the emotions that are living in our bodies right now. Mm-hmm. And we don't give narrative around that. We just say, checking in, I've got anxiety, I've got excitement, I've got some fear, I've got some deep shame, and I've got gratitude, and I'm in. And we feel those things coming from that man. And then when we come back around a second time, we explore what those emotions, what's the story around what those emotions are. And then we work with each other to gently challenge each other to discover something new. So we're not just reifying the story of who we are. No, you don't get to do that. That's the death of psychotherapy and psychology, is that reification of, I'm this. And so that work of emotional expression, and then the somatic work, and then the gently challenging work of people's implicit biases, I find to be the most helpful things. Probably the last thing I would say about men's work is the immersion in nature that I do. And nature sometimes provides 80 or 90% of the transformational experience. And all you have to do is just create the space and continue to hold this opening with the mother.
Mm-hmm.
For men, it's just, and the funny thing is, I've done it with men. This is probably about the 10th men's group I've helped to create. I started at 21 and 55, so it's a lot of years. And I just had this conversation with my colleague. We take men into the wilderness and had done so for a number of years. And we just said to ourselves, you know what? And we both arrived at this almost simultaneously. It's time to invite women and into the wilderness together. We've done our work with men for all of these years. And for whatever reason, the timing is right. And so we're going to offer something for the first time this August in Aspen, with everyone is invited. Wow. We got just super jazzed, even talking about it out loud and saying, okay, we're actually going to do this. We're actually going to open this thing up. So we're just super excited about doing that work. We both have a lot of, you mentioned masculine, and we both have a lot of feminine in us. When my wife first met me, she swore I was gay. Her brother was gay. So she knew gay. So I had this long, beautiful curly hair and this pink jacket on, and bright pink. I think was my favorite color. And I was just smiling at her the whole time, just like what she saw as the archetypical gay guy. And I got to tell you, I wasn't thinking it. Yes. I was thinking, this is trouble that she's married. And I am smitten. I'm done. And so that connection with the feminine, my colleague has that quite a bit as well. And it's really nice in many Native traditions. That's called a two-spirited person. And it's what I think a lot of individuals who have this kind of openness or experimentation to saying, who am I? Originally, we were whole beings. We were entirely consciously masculine and feminine in one being, half and half. And then we were divided into two sexes. And our task is we were given that as a gift. And our task is to consciously reintegrate that to become two-spirited people again. And sometimes I think what people in the world might be experiencing is thinking, oh, I was this and now I'm this. And that's still a dual world. And I wish those people all the best. I would just say my experience is not that. I've had experiences of being a woman being made love to by my wife in this lifetime, being penetrated by her. And I would say the freedom to be able to have that awareness and to sense into what that is really essential if you're going to do work with either sex, with the male or female. So those are probably the four pieces I would say about men's groups that are currently living in me as you asked me that question.
Yeah, that's incredible. And would love to pull on the thread of nature and, what you think is so healing about the process of working with nature and submersing oneself in it.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to me when you say that is my inner child. It took a long time for my inner child to come out, even to me. But when he did, he came out in nature when I was alone. And all of a sudden, I walked like my 5-year-old self. I felt the heart of my 5-year-old self. I could talk to and then actually talk from the space of being my 5-year-old self. And the trees and the grasses and the sun and the cloud and the wind, those were my guides, my lovers, my supporters, my listeners. There was no way that they would do anything but support absolutely any part of what came out of me. And it took me a while to get to that space of safety and trust with my own partner or with the men in my group. There was sort of terror around that level of vulnerability. And nature was what gave me the capacity to feel that again as an adult.
Yeah, I
asked the nature question first before my next question, which was vulnerability in these men's circles. And even just the act of eye gazing can be, like you said, edgy.
Yeah.
And I had a sense that, the conversation around nature and working with it is this sort of greasing of the joint when it comes to being able to open oneself up and be vulnerable. And so my next question was, I would imagine that in this work you see a tendency for some level of hesitancy as it pertains to being vulnerable in these circles. Or, I mean, we all have things that we think we can be vulnerable. Like there are topics or things that have challenges in my own life that I'm comfortable sharing and I'm comfortable being vulnerable with. And then there's the really deep stuff, right?
Yeah.
There's the really dark shit that you actually don't want to tell anybody. So I'm going to put forth this little pseudo vulnerability to everybody just to check the list.
Yes.
How do you break through that barrier? What does it usually look like? Because there's that initial comfortable vulnerability, and then there's the I'm crying, I'm weak, or I'm laughing. Sometimes you laugh your way through the things you think you're going to cry your way through.
Right.
But there is that release, and it's here's me. I'm energetically, spiritually naked in front of you, and for the first time ever, I'm just airing it all out.
Yeah.
What does that sequence look like in these groups?
That sequence looks like, if you want to experience that with the men around you, then lead the way. Do it yourself. And even after, again, 35 years of doing this work, I had this experience. We have about probably 55 men in this men's group, but we break ourselves up into different circles. But we come together a couple times a year. And I was new to this men's group. I just started because we moved up here from Texas. And so I was brand new. We were with this whole room. There was this particular exercise where people were toning, and it was like a senior member of the group who was bringing this toning that we were going to do. And even with these men, there were some guys who were goofing off and, not like, a little bit like, oh, this is, maybe this is hippie, or this guy's out of touch or something. And for me, I was goofing off at first myself, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because usually when I'm goofing off or I see somebody goofing off, there's something there. There's some juice. And so finally, I was just like, okay, I'm going to drop in. I'm just going to do this. And as I was toning, all of a sudden, I had this feeling like, man, I have a blood-curdling scream in me. And immediately, all of the shame and guilt. And I'm like, I don't know these guys. They're not going to be able to hold this container. I'm going to be judged. It was endless. I mean, the endless amount of stoppage was there for me. So I kept on toning, and I'm thinking these things, and I'm feeling all these things. And at a certain point, I just say to myself, Edmund, if not now, when? And I just opened my mouth and I let out this blood-curdling scream. And it's the way with these things. You don't really realize why you're doing it until you do it. Mm-hmm. And then all of this memory of me holding myself back, waking up in terror as a child, not going to my father's bedroom because it literally had cork on both sides of the door. It was a pretty clear picture, never disturb. And so this inability to express, and holding that all of these years, and then this moment and saying, okay, so there's this little one in me, and this looks messy, and I could get some stuff. And I got some stuff. Somebody said, man, my ears hurt as a result of that, And I said, yeah, I hear that. Somebody else say, yeah, I was just completely in my zone, and all of a sudden I just get a complete play. I hear that. So it's being willing to take the risk of the fallout, and not knowing what it's going to be, not being in control of it, and not knowing what's going to happen. And I found that group was able to hold me, and I was able to come to some incredible insights, and that led to my little one being able to come out with those men after all these years of work. And that it also, there was I did a 3-day fasting with no water and silence in the mountains. Wow. And that also, the experience itself, it didn't come out, but then after the experience, all of a sudden, full blown, my little one came out I'm part of two men's groups right now. One's a council that oversees other men's groups in Santa Barbara. And that was with that council group. And all of a sudden it was just, there I was little. And this group just was completely able to be with that. And so this is a very recent experience. And this is after, again, all of these years of work. Sometimes men get into this work and think, I've done this for 10 years or whatever. Like, I hear people saying, like, yeah, I've worked through most of my stuff. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you've worked through most of your stuff.
Like, what a funny joke you just told.
That is so great. That is so great. Let's sit down together. I mean, let's really dig in. So that's what I would say is, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, is lead the way, be incredibly vulnerable, not know what you're going to say, don't plan, and just see what's there, and take the fallout from it. Have that kind of bravery. That's vulnerability to the point of just terror. But if we can start to do that to each other, well, let's say it this way, if we can't start doing that with each other, being that vulnerable and open, we're not going to make it to the fourth density. The fourth density requires telepathy. Means everybody already knows as soon as you're thinking what you're thinking. They know what you're feeling as soon as you're feeling it, because you've made that agreement that, yes, I will be that open. And I think the men's work gives us the possibility to move toward sharing the non-share.
I love that.
Oh, man, so much there. And I really appreciate, you know, as we ask you different questions, the storytelling approach. Obviously, you're a storyteller, and it's so much it's appreciated on our end, because, you know, you can get into interviews and it's yes, no, question, answer. And it's almost like this storytelling is an art. It is an act of creation, and rather than just answering the question. And I just wanted to recognize that in you and highlight it, and just say that I appreciate that about you. It's something that I feel like it's definitely an area of my life that I can improve on and grow. And so when I just recognize it in you, and it's really wonderful to be in your presence and just listening. And I'm noticing in myself that as an interviewer, sometimes I don't have a question because I'm just listening as you tell stories. And it might not add to the actual interview, but I'm just like, yeah, wow, you know, as you're telling these stories.
I think the listener adds the most. Any connection between people. I've been in groups with people where a man may not really share much of anything for months, and then all of a sudden he says something, and it changes everyone's world. And we look forward to the next 6 months when that man is going to say something again. And the power of him listening through all of that time, and then taking all of that in, and then being able to bring something out of that, that's an incredible skill, because you're not just listening, you're deciding as you're listening, what are the pieces that I'm going to move forward with in the world? That's not a passive activity. It's incredibly active. And if we don't have those listeners, it's like my first book when I was a little kid, my dad gave me The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And I almost just memorized the whole damn thing, because every word spoke to me. And one of the things he says at a certain point, when they're all talking about what he's sharing and how, you know, they're just like, oh, this stuff's so great. You know, he says, but wasn't I also a listener? Whole time I was speaking. Yeah. So in a way, there's really no difference between listening and speaking, as long as when we're speaking, we're listening.
Yeah.
And listening, we're speaking in a certain kind of way.
Yeah. I love that.
Wow, love it. What a treat.
What a gift.
We're a little over 2 hours here, so we can come to a close, and this has just been just an absolute gift. Edmund, as far as resources, you know, we've talked about Law of One. You know, people should check out that book, and there's just incredible commentary on the book as well out there, if it's a little too deep to just jump into the book. But Steiner and Waldorf, where can people learn more, and maybe in a bite-sized way? For instance, I've attempted to read Steiner and haven't, had as much recall attempting to listen to audiobooks as much as I have had gotten from community. Like, I'm on part of Facebook communities that are people interpreting Steiner, posing questions, posing their own commentary. And I find a lot more efficacy in the way that I'm able to absorb a lot of his work through other modalities instead of going directly to the source. Is there any resources that you would recommend for people who are interested in Steiner, interested in Waldorf, to, dip their toes in, get their feet wet?
I think what you're talking about, where you have a learning community, is ideal. Steiner was very big on the human encounter. I mean, that's what karma is. Karma doesn't happen without the human encounter. And so one of the things he always said to communities who were wanting to work spiritually is, now you must get to know each other very deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And so you getting online in a community, and as you said, being able to be vulnerable and saying, I don't understand this, or this, or I don't agree with this, right? Taking that willingness to take whatever comes your way because it's how you're experiencing life, and then deepening that community. And then out of that, you start finding the individuals who are resonating in a similar way with what your questions are and what your path is. And so maybe this sort of splinter group evolves out of that work. But it's in really encountering the other human being and having those conversations, whether online or in person. In person's always ideal if you can. Yeah, I mean, his work, again, it's translated twice. It's translated from the spiritual world, and it's translated from the German. And here's something that I think is really important to know about Steiner's work. It's important. This sounds stupid. It's important when you read his work, and that when you put it down, that you don't remember any of it.
Just marinate in it in your subconscious.
Live it. Yeah, he's not speaking to your intellect. He's not speaking to the earthly understanding in the way that you're used to absorbing information. It's not information. This is an initiatory capacity. You have the capacity to initiate yourself through this work. And that takes a new kind of reading.
Yeah.
That would be a completely different podcast, but quite frankly, a very essential one. What is the new way in the consciousness soul of taking in the capacity to move from the level of someone who's clairaudient and clairvoyant to the next stage of actually being able to not just hear it and see it, but to interpret it as an initiate. And then the third level, which I think the both of you have a good relationship with, is the karmic path of action, which is the adept says, how do I put this into the world? How do I incarnate this through my own body, through my own being, and how do I bring the fruits of this to other people? So those are three different levels of initiation that take place. And the capacity for that human being, that entity who was in this lifetime known as Steiner, to come through and interpret the spiritual world in that way that bypasses your intellect is the whole point of what he's bringing. The whole point of what he's bringing. It's called the draw to forgetfulness. You forget earthly memory, and you attain the capacity to remember. It's not even remember. You attain in the face of that, which is terrifying. I'm laughing, but I may not weep. Have a mental breakdown. The ability to take this work in so deeply at a soul spirit level, and to cook in it like you're a beaker and like you're your own alchemist. And that's what we have the capacity to do in this day and age for the first time ever in the history of humanity. That's what's so cool. And all of these sources from Steiner, maybe in a way, the less you understand, but the more you resonate. You're a tone poem. You're a symphony inside yourself. And the string section and the drums and the winds, they're all playing, and they're being played upon when he's bringing this music. And this music is coming directly as Pythagoras noted, from the harmony of the spheres. And it's playing through us. It played through him, and it plays through us. And to the extent that you are taking this in, you're actually creating a new organ in yourself. And that organ becomes who you are and how you are in the world. And it becomes a new kind of intelligence that we have no idea what it is yet. Or you can go to the online chat group.
Yeah.
Amazing, my friend. Amazing.
Well, I can't wait to listen back to this conversation as I edit it, and from a completely different perspective, just as a listener. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your light with us and all of our listeners, of course. Where can people learn more about you? If you have a website or if you have anything that you want to point people towards, please do that.
Well, I did mention that Jared and I are doing this piece, Jared Pickard, through the Be Here website, Be Here farm website. And so you could certainly go there, and we're starting that in February. I have just a sort of a landing page site myself, my first and last name, edmundknighton.com, where that's my home for private work. And so I'm a clinical psychologist. That's my PhD, and then my specialties are in transpersonal psychology, somatic psychology, and the postdoctoral work that I did, the pre-doctoral work, was in neuropsychology. I'm very interested in the brain interface, the sort of spirit-brain interface, which I think is space as a being, but that's another conversation. And my postdoctoral work is in family systems. So I work not only with individuals, but also couples, families, organizations, communities. And doing just it's all the work is the same, really. It's just loving each other and figuring out who we are as a result of that. And just bringing ourselves with all the sort of funkiness that we are, all the questions that we have. That empowers other people to realize we haven't gone very far.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the only other thing would be the council group that I talked about is the fire tenders through Santa Barbara. And so through fire tenders are also Inspiration, which is, it's an umbrella organization that I'm a board member of that is, it's based around a church that we have that our ceremony, our ritual, our blessing is ecstatic dance.
Cool.
That is the basis of that work. And then the men's group and there are women's circles that grow out of that. And as I said, we're going to do a combination for the first time after 12 years of just doing the men's work. So that's the fire tenders group. And I don't know if there's anything else that's going on in my life except just a whole lot of gratitude.
Incredible.
Love it.
Incredible. Well, we'll definitely have you back on if you're willing, because I'm sure we got hours and hours more of questions for you. Just so much gratitude for you. Thanks for giving us a part of your day and for just sharing in this, beautiful conversation. And I love you, man.
You're both, yeah. I mean, it's just, I want to relax. It's like, I actually just feel like I'm in your living room with you right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very relaxed. And I do feel like we could chat all day and go to some really, really beautiful places. And I feel like we've just done that too for a couple of hours, but I'd be more than happy to chat with you guys whenever you want.
We'll make it happen. And are you in Sandpoint all year long?
At this point, yeah, we still have a house in Texas, and we came there from California, but sometimes I go to Aspen with my colleague and we do some work there. He's got a home / 35-acre sort of retreat center there. Sometimes I go to Santa Barbara because he has the same kind of setup there. And then, sometimes I go to hunt in Florida.
Cool. Well, would love to see you in the flesh at some point. We spend our summers up in North Idaho, Priest Lake. So we're close.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Close by. So we'll have to
you're 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
And actually at some point the first podcast I ever did was with Paul Check. like a month or so ago. And after we got done, we had the same kind of long conversation. He's like, dude, we're going to do like a series. Like, we're going to put together like this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, we'll do that. And we haven't done it yet. But he said, when you do, we're going to come down for 3 days. We're going to journey. This is going to be so fun. And so if you guys, where are you guys? What island are you on? Catalina or?
Coronado, just off San Diego.
Okay. Oh yeah, down there. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, when I'm down in that neighborhood, that could also be a possibility.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll make it happen.
We'll make one of those happen. Thank you again, and thank you to all of our listeners for hanging in there. If you hung out till now, you are really our favorite. So thank you for hanging out.
Mine too.
Yeah. And check the show notes for all the links. We will have all of that information for you there. And we just appreciate you. We're grateful for you. We couldn't do this without you. We love you. We mean it. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.